Hey everyone, how's it going? Olian here with another video about Sylenth1. So we're gonna be talking about how to recreate this pretty cool, spacey, stringy pad synth key sound which I designed in Sylenth1. And instead of just going over all the setting and letting you copy the preset, I'm actually gonna go into depth about some of the techniques which I used and my general approach because, well, if I get those points across, then you're going to be able to create many other patches, basically an endless amount of other presets for yourself and be able to tweak them to your liking. So I think that makes a lot more sense. And if you want to have the preset instead, feel free to hook me up on or hit me up on Facebook and I'm gonna be happy to send it to you. But yeah, the video is gonna get a bit longer because I'm gonna go into detail and it's gonna be full of information, of course, but that obviously takes a bit of time. So yeah, let's actually jump right into it. I'm gonna get rid of this drum channel over here because that was just for the preview, and I'm gonna duplicate the track here. So we basically have a second instance. So if I kind of lose track of what I'm talking about, I can go back and look at the actual preset because we're gonna be building it from scratch in this bad boy over here. I'm also going to get rid of the glue compressor, which was just a little side chain compression to make the preview sound a bit better. Yeah, so basically now we're ready to go. And I'm going to be, well, maybe let's do a quick overview over the patch and then we're going to break it down. So in this patch, we're using all 4 oscillators, all playing the same waveform, but there's a little trick behind it which makes it slightly more special than it looks. And we're sending all of those oscillators through the same filter, applying a bit of filter modulation, a bit of phase modulation right here, and then in the end I added a bit of effects. I cut out some low end with this EQ, added a bit of delay and a bit of reverb, which I'm actually not going to be talking about in the video because that would make it way too long. But for my final settings, like I said, hit me up on Facebook for the preset. But yeah, this delay and the reverb were just to make it sound slightly better than it and don't have it as naked as it sounds without those things. But I didn't put that much time into these settings, and I'm probably, if I ever use the set, gonna use other plugins to do that or achieve this effect. So yeah, I don't want to go too much into detail about this. Anyway, yeah, let's initialize the patch and kind of start talking about how to build a patch like this and yeah, my process maybe. So what I like to do up front is load up an EQ because, well, sometimes the synthesizers don't have amazing EQs, and it's cool to have one ready which you can use, because I do think that makes sense to EQ it a bit while you're designing it, because yeah, maybe you want to cut out some muddy low end and this kind of stuff, and it's just cool to have an EQ ready for that. So yeah, another thing that I have to say in advance is that when it comes to pad sound and big sounds and stringy sounds and this kind of stuff, the chord you're playing really matters. So in this case, we're playing a very easy minor chord with the basis note or the fundamental note 1 octave below. For example, if we're playing a C minor chord, or if we're pressing a C, we're going to be playing this C over here. We're going to be playing the E flat, the G, and then the C 1 octave below. And the reason, which I think is kind of important, the reason I'm using this chord MIDI effect is that, well, I just have to press one button and I already create this chord which consists of 4 notes. But well, what I actually wanted to say is that I think it's important to create a chord and play a chord. Doesn't matter if you play it or if you have this MIDI thing or if you create a MIDI clip with those chords inside, but it's important that you play a chord instead of creating a chord in Sylenth. So maybe a little story about this. There are many presets which are using chords and which create chords within Sylenth, because I mean, you have 4 oscillators and that you can already create a chord which contains 4 different notes by using these oscillators. But you're definitely giving up on one of the advantages that Sylenth has, which is you can use a ton of voices and save a lot of CPU doing those. So it doesn't use much CPU, and you have a lot of voices which you can use to create huge sounds. And the moment you create a chord within Sylenth, you're basically giving up on a lot of voices, because the moment you play a chord, it kind of acts as a multiplier, because every oscillator plays the amount of voices which you set for every note in the chord. So let's say we're already going to start setting up this thing, and as I said, we want to be using sawtooth waves on every oscillator, so I'm just going to do that real quick. And since we know we want to do a big sound, we can already start with a bunch of voices and then maybe fine-tune that later. But let's start with 6 voices each for now, for example. And we're going to set those like that. So now every oscillator has the ability to play 6 voices for every note that you press. Since we're playing a MIDI chord, which is 4 notes, we have to set the polyphony to 4, because, or at least 4, because this way we can actually trigger 4 notes per oscillator. So now this 96 over here means that we're playing 4 notes on 4 oscillators with 6 voices each. So 4 times 4 times 6, which is 96. If we were creating a 4-tone chord within Sylenth1 and then just press in 1 note, we would basically lose this 1 multiplier of 4, which would basically lead to the point where we only can play 24 voices. So you can already see that, well, we have 4 times as many voices in this way, which can make it sound 4 times as big, maybe. Not completely accurate, but yeah, something like that. Anyway, so yeah, so like this, we want to make it sound as big as possible. And something we can already do from the start as well is detuning these voices, because if you play at this point, we're playing the same voice because we have the same settings on every oscillator. We're playing the same voice 96 times, which is just going to be 96 times as loud as playing that voice once. So it's not going to sound big. But the moment we start detuning these voices, which is basically going to change the pitch of each single voice slightly, and in Sylenth also panning them left and right, it's going to make it sound much, much, much bigger, because now instead of having one voice 96 times, we have 96 similar voices, which are all slightly different. So they create this chorus and yeah, this big effect, because they sound slightly different, which makes it sound bigger, and they're not the same. And something we can also do from the bat is turning off the retrig mode, because we want to make it sound very big. And turning off the retrig mode helps you to make it sound very big, at least when it's in stereo. We're going to talk about the mono compatibility in a minute. But what this retrig thing does is basically every voice always starts on at the same point, and every time you press a key, it also starts on that same point again. And since we detuned these voices, they're slightly different to each other, but still pretty similar. So once you throw them exactly on top of each other, it's still not going to sound that big, because they're kind of layering on top of each other and just slightly different. The moment you kind of make all of these different oscillators and voices behave a bit all over the place, they're going to be sounding even bigger. Think of it a bit like if you have a choir with 96 people, instead of having them stand in one row and scream to the front, you're kind of spreading them all over the room, which means all of these voices also kind of arrive to your ear at a different point in time. So yeah, it's going to sound bigger because they're spread all over the room. It's not the perfect analogy, but I think it will do the trick for here. So yeah. So then how do I design this patch? So many of the patches I design are just experimental. I don't always have something specific in mind that I want to create, and then I try to get there. Like many times I try out different things and I come across something cool, and then I use that approach to kind of, yeah, create more cool stuff. Let me detune these over here as well. So yeah, that was the basic building block, and we said that we want to use, since we want to make one sound and kind of have it all compact together, we're going to route all the 4 oscillators through the same high pass, or not high pass, low pass or high cut filter, which means Sylenth is kind of split in 2 pages, part A and part B. And so that's what the A and B stands for over here. And we want to route both pages or both parts into the same filter, into filter A. So I'm going to turn off filter A and not have anything go in here. Now all 4 oscillators are going into the same filter, which is cool. What we can then already do, since we want to get kind of this old school, nice, a bit dirty sound, is we can already turn up some warm drive. I'm going to open up the filter all the way at this point to just like not have it cut out any frequencies, but we can add some warm drive and some drive over here in order to, yeah, to already add some distortion and then go from there. In this case, I just decided to go for that. So how we're tuning these oscillators, my approach for this one was, okay, I want to play 2 saw waves 1 octave apart, which would be like that. And then I technically wanted to use a square wave at the same octave as this oscillator. But I wanted to be able to kind of use some pulse width modulation, which you cannot technically do in Sylenth, but there's a workaround. So what I decided to do is, I actually covered this technique in another video in the pulse width modulation tutorial, which I uploaded, and some, I think also in a wavetable, Sylenth wavetable tutorial, or video, which I uploaded. So I'm not going to go in too much depth or go over how to do this technique again, but real quick, what we can do is we can use oscillator B and A in order to create a square wave by using a saw wave, then using a second saw wave, but shifting the phase by 180 degrees and inverting it. And now the moment just these 2 oscillators combined create a pulse wave, and changing the phase is gonna basically do pulse width modulation. And we can change this knob or modulate this knob by then later doing some phase modulation, phase A, which is then going to change the phase from page A to B, which is going to give us some nice movement. So what I have to say for this specific patch, maybe also for those who already watched the other video, since we're using so many voices and detuning them and not re-triggering them, we're not doing like perfect pulse width modulation, and we're not creating a perfect square wave right now, but we're still kind of creating an effect of some sort of effect, which is going to sound, yeah, interesting. So yeah, so much about that. So we have our oscillator A1 and B2, which create the pulse wave. Then we have A1, which is just this normal sawtooth wave. And then we have B1, which is the sawtooth wave, which we want to bring 1 octave up. Okay. And the rest we're going to do is be taken care of on part A, because yeah, we're going through that filter. So this is kind of what matters. Something I have to say about the amp envelopes, they kind of work weird when you route all of the envelopes through one filter. So this envelope kind of applies for these 2 oscillators as well, but this also has a small effect on it. So what I do is I just leave it the way it is and just give it some release so we don't get any clicking or popping. And then this basically turns into a volume knob, which is always kind of is. But the moment you add more release and more attack, it doesn't really have the effect it's supposed to. So we're going to leave this amp envelope the way it is, have this envelope over here. Yeah, What we also had in the setup is I wanted to add a bit of like cutoff modulation, filter modulation. So I decided cutoff A. We just need cutoff A because we're just using filter A. But sometimes I basically just use AB. Doesn't matter. In this case, we're on the safe side. Since here it says AB, and we're like, okay, maybe it works a bit weird. We're also going to use the 12 dB because I wanted to have like kind of open filter which gives lets through some more high frequencies. So yeah, so this is kind of my starting point. So I would set this up and then maybe bring down the filter, and this would be the point where I start trying out the sound. And for that I have to click here. I hope this didn't just explode your ears because yeah, getting the sound right is sometimes not that easy. Okay, here we go. We're gonna bring down the volume for that. So that already sounds pretty cool. And now we get a bit of like an attacky sound because of this modulation which we have over here. And I mean, we could basically also turn this into like a stab sound. If we then do that, for example. But that's not what we wanted to do. We wanted to do the pad sound. So for that, the amp envelope, we're going to give it some sustain, decent amount of release, and a pretty long decay. And that kind of shapes the shape of the patch, or the shape of the pad. So what happens is when you play it is that instead of quickly going away, you already have a sustain level set, which means that as long as you press a button, it's going to stay at this volume. And the moment you let that button go, it takes some time to fade out. And the decay is basically, this would be the maximum level that you could get. And the decay time tells you how much time does it take to get to that level. So now the decay time doesn't matter because we're staying at a maximum level. But if we set that to about here, for example, then this knob over here tells us how much time passes until we get to this level, which we set here. So now it still sounds quite attacky because we basically have this setup over here. And one trick you can do is, which is like kind of copying an analog setup of the Juno synthesizers, like the Juno 60, is copying the settings of this amp envelope over here and adding them to this envelope over here by pasting it. Because what happens is that in those synthesizers, for these old school kind of cool pad sounds, like the Juno 60, there was only one envelope which you would use for the amplitude as well as for the filter. So copying the settings basically makes it somewhat the same envelope. Yeah. So it's as if you were using only one. And if we want to, well, let me take out some drive. If we want to get rid of some more of that attack, we can add some attack time. Which we can use instead of compression, for example. If you don't want to get rid of the peaks or this kind of stuff by compressing, you can just add some attack, which is going to have the same effects. So since we just changed something, we're going to copy this and paste it over here. So yeah, that already sounds pretty big and cool. We can now here decide to do some pulse width modulation. So the effect is pretty subtle, but because obviously the sound is really similar, but you can hear some movement within the sound when you're applying the pulse width modulation. So maybe speed that up a bit, and this way it will be easier to hear. Now you can really hear that there is movement, and we're going to slow that movement down. And movement and sounds make them sound a lot more complex and a lot more natural, because sounds in reality always, or many times, are not just like one sound all be like at the same time, one constant sound, very stable over time. Like usually there's some sort of change within the frequencies over time, and that's why pulse width modulation is so sick, because you can basically change the frequencies which you have within your sound over time, instead of having this kind of static, synthetic sounding sound. So yeah, that's basically already it. So what I did then is add a bit of resonance. Or did I? So now you can decide, do you want to add some resonance or not? What does it do to the sound? It will kind of have a slight EQ effect as well, because you're basically boosting higher frequencies. And since we have a dropping filter, it can also have a kind of annoying effect. But yeah, we can also kind of turn it down, turn it up, or even modulate the resonance a bit. If we say, okay, we want to have some resonance in the beginning, but we don't want to have this filter sweep effect. So we can basically take the resonance over here and also give it an envelope and be like, okay, we have a bit of resonance, we turn down the resonance, we add an envelope, which is gonna have some resonance in the beginning, but then over this period of time, it's gonna go away, which means we only have this resonance in the beginning, and it then falls down. So yeah, well, we're already very close. So now the fine-tuning process is kind of to understand what you wanna use the sound for in your production. Obviously, maybe you just want to create a preset, which is also fine, and then you can basically stop here, or try just to fine-tune the detune, and maybe even play around with the phase and this kind of stuff, and make it sound as nice as possible for yourself. But I think it's also cool to, well, to create presets in context. Right now I don't have a track that I'm working on right here, so I cannot really do it in context. But what you can think about is that you can kind of EQ it in order to fit your sound. You can add the resonance in order to fit, like to add more character or less character, depending on how present you want the set to be. You can also change the detune amount and the voices amount in order to see, okay, how wide or how bright do you want to make it sound. You can also check for mono compatibility, which we should maybe definitely talk about, because that's something you have to keep in mind when using this like huge choruses, because once you bounce them down to mono, they can sound pretty bad. But that can be okay, because maybe you're using the pad in order to have it in the background, and the moment you're listening to something in mono, it's probably because you're listening on very small speakers and this kind of stuff, and then many things in the background kind of disappear anyway and just add some texture. But if you're using it as a lead sound in the front, then it has to sound good in mono as well. So then maybe you want to play around with the stereo knobs over here, which are reducing the stereo width of the sound effectively. And then you can basically turn down the stereo width, which is going to make it sound slightly smaller. Let's make it all the way mono, just to get an idea. Just to check, we're going to get the utility effect from over here to see if it's really mono. pretty much mono. So then we see, now we can say, okay, I want it to sound good in mono as well because of what kind of role it plays in my production. So then you can, well, bring down the stereo width and then try to fine tune it in a way so it also sounds good in mono. And then turn it back up to stereo and check what it sounds like. And it's gonna probably, if you're working on headphones, sound completely amazing, because on headphones stuff that's stereo sounds very nice, but on speakers maybe it's slightly less important, but also cool. Small speakers even less important, but different story. So yeah, let me actually check over here to see if we left out anything. Yeah, we're basically created that. We created that. We have the filter settings. Yeah, I already said something about the effects. We can see what we did over here. That's basically the patch. So if you stuck around until now, I'm super happy about that. Thank you a lot for watching, and I hope you learned a lot. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me up in the comments or on Facebook or anything. I'm gonna be very happy to answer them. If you want to see me talk about other things, or if you have any other requests or this kind of stuff, feel free to share that as well as feedback. Obviously, I'm kind of new to making videos, and I can definitely get a lot better, and I need a lot of practice, but I hope the video was interesting for you anyway. And yeah, if you just want to connect or something on Facebook, you can do that as well. And if you feel like liking or subscribing, you can obviously do that too. But yeah, thanks for watching, and hope to see you around in some other videos. Take care. Bye.